Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the Usagi Podjimbo podcast. I'm your host, Mike, as always. If you're new to the podcast, this is a podcast all about Usagi Yojimbo, me going through it and talking about it and giving my thoughts on exactly what exactly is going on. And I'm a fan of the podcast. If you're an old listener, thanks for listening again. Thanks for coming back. And new listeners, go back and listen to the very first episode all the way to this one, and continue listening. If you want to help the podcast grow, you can do so by telling your friends. Share the podcast. If you like Usagi Yojimbo, you know people who like Usagi Yojimbo and podcasts. Well, obviously this podcast is for them, right? Yeah, I know. I think so. Yeah, you know. But we have a Facebook group, Usagi Podjimbo, Usagi Yojimbo podcast, and you can find me there as well as on the Usagi Yojimbo Facebook page group with all the other Usagi Yojimbo like super fans. But let's get into this episode. I don't want to stall you guys, from hearing about my thoughts on this episode or this comic issue. We are looking at Broken Ritual, which I had to do a little uh, research on this one because it says by Stan Sakai from a plot by Sergio Aragones. I think that's how you say it. I could be butchering it, obviously. Maybe, probably am. 90% sure I'm butchering that name. But I guess he wrote a story, and Stan Sakai is like interpreting this story or putting his own little spin on that story, I'm guessing. Really interesting to see. I didn't do much. That's all the really like research I did behind this particular story. Interesting to see Stan take a spin on somebody else's story. But we'll get into that. But this is a Broken Ritual, and I love the cover. I'm guessing it's the cover for this in the collector's edition. It says it's a cat. The cat samurai is also is very much battle worn. He has a sword to his stomach, and he looks very worse for wear, and he has like an eye, like a thing like draped over his eye, almost like an eye patch, kind of not like an eye patch, but like a wound dressing almost. But we get into the story. We see Usagi. It's nighttime. Usagi is cold. The wind is howling. He hears a cry out in the distance. He's like, I've never heard a cry. I never heard such anguish in a cry before. And he runs upon a mountain town. He's like, oh, I found this town. I was very tempted to steer clear of the town because of what I heard in the distance. He heard a creepy cry. He doesn't want to go to a creepy town in the middle of the night, but he does. He goes to this town, and he is like, "Oh, it's deserted. A town like this shouldn't be deserted. It's such a big town." He happens to see a Tokage, and he's like, "Well, at least there's somebody around here." Usagi says. The Tokage ends up getting scared and runs away, and Usagi is like, "This seems to absolutely terrifying." He seems to be me. Usagi says. He's talking about the Tsukage, but there has to be something around here. He says, he goes walking along. He's like, oh, there's some light in this house, and he goes to bang on the window that's closed. The light goes out. He's like, huh, that's really strange. What's going on? He goes walking through the rest of the town. He sees more light. He's like, oh, there's another light. I'm going to go there. So he ends up going there, opens up the door. People are aghast and scared. And he's like, oh, what's the matter? What's going on? Looks like you've seen a ghost, Usagi says. And he's like, innkeeper, can you bring me some tea? I need to wash this dust out of my mouth. And he's like, I may bring me something, maybe some rice, some vegetables, stuff like that, and 2 sweet cakes, something wrong, he says. And the innkeep happens to be like, oh, no, samurai, I'll get what you need to continue on your way. And Usagi's like, by the way, what was that wailing I heard out in the distance, in the outside? He says, and everybody like chokes on their food and like spits it out and like, oh my god, like he heard it. He heard the wailing, and it's just a funny scene to see these people like getting freaked out that they happen to possibly reference a ghost. We see this man. He is a very portly man. He says, "Oh, that was the general, the ghost, the general, uh, Tadoka. I believe that's how you say it, Tadoka." Um, and he served under Lord Mifune, and Usagi's like, Tadoka, I served with him as well. Why is his spirit in such anguish? And we see this man should come up to Usagi. He's like, my name's Nishimaru, and Nishimaru. He's the owner of a bookstore, apparently, and he will tell you everything, the tragedy that happened in the morning. This is not a story you tell somebody at night in the dark. I gotta be honest, I thought this guy for a second. I thought he was the guy from the duel, the guy who set up all the like the bets and stuff. Um, but he's not. He just looks very similar, just a little less, just a little more slimmed down. He says, or I say, he has a very round face, but he just has a slimmer build to him. Hours go by apparently, so they're eating and drinking, I guess, at this inn together, and uh, Nishimaru says, here's my shop. I'll talk to you later. Uh, or he says we could talk at the back. Sorry. So I guess morning has, or not morning. It's close to morning, I guess. Or maybe he just forgot about the rule that he was going to go talk to Usagi about all this stuff in the morning. But who knows? Maybe he got too drunk. And he's like, oh, bring me some tea into the back room. And we see them getting ready to talk about this story. And he's like, ever since the hauntings began, people have been leaving this town soon. Itself is very much a ghost town, he says. Nishimaru says. And he's like, most of the details. Lord Mifune's samurai fell to Lord Hikiji, but we find out that General Tadoka and his young lieutenant made their way to the actual village in shambles. They were very much worse for wear. They were barely surviving. They actually they asked for like drink and food, and they couldn't deny them. The townsfolk could not deny them, and they actually tried to organize the townsfolk against Lord Hikiji, but they were all just peasants, merchants, artisans. They were very much not warriors, and they all got scared. They hid. They ran. General Tadoka called us cowards. They said, traitors, and worse. Uh, we could not be moved. And you see him crying. The lieutenant wanted to slay all of them, apparently. You see the lieutenant's face very much like crying and very much mad with anger that these people would not stand up with Lord Mifune's men and go against Lord Hikiji. Sadly, that's not to say. The lieutenant fell to his knees and said, it must be difficult to be so young and to know you may die so soon. Suddenly, a rider came through the town and proclaimed that Lord Mifune is dead. Lord Mifune is dead, very much like Paul Revere. The British are coming. The British are coming. But this guy was telling us, or telling everybody, that Lord Mifune was dead, and Lord Akiji held his castle. He rode out of town just as quick as he arrived into town, apparently. And we see that they did not take it so well. Nishimaru apparently was so close enough to see the general's face. Uh, it made with sweat and cold ran down his spine. He started to remove his helmet and all of his sword and his padding, his armor that he had on him. He took it all off and it removed everything, all his samurai garb, and he even took off his shoulder pads and sleeves and stuff like that. He then sat on the ground in the dirt. He closed his eyes for a minute. Then he placed his dirk, I believe that's how they call it, his dirk down, which is dirk, I guess, is his smaller blade that he has on him. He says he saw his lieutenant swallow, then slowly nod in understanding. This is seppuku. He said, I have heard of this ritual, but I've never thought I would witness it. Rather than face the shame of capture, he would follow under Lord Mifune's death. He would show us all how to die as a samurai. And he stood there transfixed, or he says, I stood there transfixed behind as the safety of the walls, and we see him put the sword up to his stomach. Lord Tadoka puts the sword up to his stomach, and it says, first, the cut across the stomach, left to right, and then it cut upward, and you see like this groaning, like you see his face, very much he feels the blade going through him. He's like, I saw the lieutenant, his fear in his eyes, his sweating hands tightened, and he grasped anticipation to deliver the final death blow, he says, which is, it's very hard to look at this page. It's a very intense moment, I have to say, in this issue. Before the young lieutenant, I can't talk today, the young lieutenant was going to strike down his commanding officer. He ends up getting struck down by Lord Hikiji's men. They found him. Incredibly, the general tried to with all his pain, he tried to snatch his blade and go for his throat, which to alas that did not happen. And the men were I don't want to say like taken back that they managed to find him and stop him. I would say they kind of seem to take pleasure in this, and they actually drew straws. The Lord Hikiji's men drew straws to see who would actually. I don't know if they really took pleasure in it. Who knows? They seemed kind of scared to do it at one point in the panel. But to actually take Tadoka's life. And it says, the general was a fierce warrior, even though he was incapacitated. I could see the fear in his executioner's eyes, he says. The man was dying, but the legend was still all too real. He lets out this gut-wrenching cry, scaring the men, and they happen to strike him down, they say. Nishimaru says, to this day, the blood lies puddled on the streets remaining. The entire town of our cowardness, nothing we could do will remove the stain of our shame, he says. And apparently, when the moon is full on nights like this, General Tadoka's ghost appears and reenacts his death, and uh, Nishimaru have his say, and all we do is hide behind the walls as we did long, long ago. Nishimaru happens to pour Usagi some tea, and he says, in the morning, there will be no evidence of what happened exactly. And Usagi happens to say, that's really interesting, to see no one even tries to comfort even a specter, And apparently, one person actually tried to confront the specter, and that didn't actually end so well. He was a samurai. He was drunk, apparently. He went about trying to find him. He found him. He found the specter. He found General Takoga, and he ran in fear apparently, and he did not actually really truly confront the general. And then Usagi actually says, "Huh, it is not your village that is." Like I said before, the Ronin runs away screaming, and Usagi happens to say to Nishimaru that it is not your village that is cursed, but the general's spirit that is in anguish. He says, and Nishimaru says, "What do you mean? What's going on? How have you solved the mystery on why the general returns?" And Usagi's like, I'm not really for sure, but General Tadoka was a staunch comrade, and I must investigate this, Usagi says. We come to find out tonight is actually the second night of a full moon, and I will need your help to pull the general spirit to rest, and we move on from there, which is really funny to to, to hear about, kind of, because I don't think Nishimaru really wants to help out Usagi at this point, especially with some ghosts. Nishimaru says Usagi night is coming. Come on, let's go. Let's hurry up. Let's get this over with. He says. And Usagi says, I have learned to get my rest whenever I can. When it comes to being a wanderer, I guess being good rest is hard to find. Um, You see later on, Usagi is ready to go, and he's like, "I'll need a bucket of water and a ladle," he says, and it's not. And Nishimaru says, "But water will not wash away the stains," and he's like, "It's not for the water, or it's not for the streets. Sorry, not for the water, not for the streets," he says, and he goes off with his bucket of water. We see Nishimaru and one of the other men, or is it a woman? I think no, it's a man. It's a man. It's another man. They're hiding behind the wall, looking through the window, and Usagi is washing his sword. And now he's like, "Now I see something." I'm guessing this is Nishimaru who is talking, and he's like, "The blood is disappearing," and we see this like smoke come up from the blood, and Usagi kind of is blinded by the smoke, and we see General Tadoka, and Usagi's like, "General Tadoka, I am Miyamoto Usagi. My family has been a retainer for Lord Mifune's clan for generations," he says. And Usagi says, "I myself served Lord Mifune personal bodyguard," he says. And during the Great War, it would have been an honor to act as your second, he says. And we see Tadoka lay his head down. Usagi raises his sword, and we see Tadoka have his knife, his blade to his stomach, and he says, "First cut, second cut." Then the head dips, and Usagi swings, and the general is gone, nowhere to be found. Nishimaru shows up and says, "The general is gone. There was no scream." And Usagi looks up into the air, kind of sad, and he says, "And there never will be again. The haunting is over." How? Nishimaru says, and he's like, "No." Usagi says, "No matter how great a warrior's renown and unworthy renown and unworthy death is a lasting shame, he says. To be slain by some nameless uh, uh, person with no family history brought dishonor to Tadoka's name, apparently, he says. And I completed the ritual as it should be. Yeah, apparently he does complete the ritual. And so Jinro Tadoka's spirit is free from suffering, and now all the men of war were now if all the men of war were so fortunate, Usagi says. And that is where this particular issue ends. Man, this issue was very much something, I have to say. Um, it was interesting way of telling the story. I hope I communicated it well enough for you guys, because it's very much more not really word balloons. It's very much, the story is being told to us for a majority of this particular story. It's being told to Usagi. It's being told to us by Nishimaru. But this one was really interesting because it seems like Usagi was being inserted into this other story, and how it affected Usagi was really interesting. So we've seen supernatural stuff before, but this one is really interesting because like it plays into the whole seppuku aspect of honor and what is dishonorable and stuff like that. But this one was really interesting, and I wonder if Usagi had the answers all along and he knew it was going to happen, or if he picked it up later on and he wanted to help this soul be laid to rest, especially somebody he actually knew. uh, I think he knew, like, I don't know if he knew him very well, but he knew of him, it seems like. um, it was really interesting, very somber, a very somber um, issue, I have to say. I was like, whoa, like that's kind of an interesting way to take the story, especially an interesting way to take a ghost story that didn't really truly have a lot of action, except for in the parts where there was the ghost story itself, or the story of uh, Tadoka himself. It was really interesting to see how Stan like separated the two stories. Like we had Usagi, who had like the traditional art, and then when we went to Tadoka's story, there very much was like a lot of the art changed in a very interesting way. It was more of like a very gritty art style, almost like very gritty, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles gritty art style. It was interesting how he distinguished the two, which I really did actually like that aspect, because it's very much, I feel like, added a different layer and a different like way to look at the story, I guess you could say. Like the story seemed to very much have like a weight to the story, um this is what happens, when somebody who is not honorable like takes another man's life, and maybe that man goes around and haunts a town and stays there for years, because it's been years since Lord Mifune has died, I think. And to see what happens to a soldier who has basically lost everything, and doesn't really truly know what to do anymore except take his own life in return for losing. It's the only honorable way he sees fit to proceed in his life. It's really interesting to see, and I definitely feel like this story has a lot of different layers that I'm probably not picking up on at this moment. And I feel like it's gonna have to be a third, fourth, and fifth reading. Um, Definitely, but I definitely recommend this story. It was a lot of fun. Definitely check it out. Sorry for the I can't talk. The technical difficulties at one point in this podcast. I will definitely try to ramify that and get that technical little snafu out of here. Thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we will catch you guys on the next episode. And stay safe. Go read some Usagi. Tell your friends, and hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast.